Jenna, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. You've been very patient with me and my crazy schedule, and thank you.
No problem.
So, my friend, before we get into it too deeply, can you just give us like the 10-cent tour and talk a little bit about who you are and what you've done and where you came from?
Sure. Well, I'm Jenna. I am the founder.
Hi, Jenna.
And executive director of 412 Foster Project. I founded it 2 years ago. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary of our founding.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we're set up we have a really, really vague, mission statement. Everyone always gets on me about that. We were just set up to help assist and support children and families in foster care. And it's vague for a reason. I really just want to meet children and families where they're at. And they don't even necessarily have to be in foster care. They're also just children and families who are at risk of entering into a system that might lead them into foster care as well. And so that's really all the organization is set up to kind of do right now.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been a child welfare social worker for about 10 years now.
Okay.
I shouldn't say child welfare. I've worked in and around child welfare for about 10 years now, but I worked in acute mental health. I worked at the Allegheny County Jail. I worked at Western Psych. I've worked in other nonprofits, hospital, clinical settings, kind of worked all over the place. I also have an MBA, kind of a random fact.
Oh,
Throw that in there.
I'd imagine in your line of work, that's probably almost required.
It was the worst, too.
No one ever loves the process of an MBA. Did you ever notice that?
Yeah, I hated it. Yeah, and that's a lot of I've always worked in the field. And then I just kind of wandered in child welfare. I worked kind of in and around it. And after I had my son, I saw a job opening working for a foster care agency. And I went in, interviewed for it, and I got hired, and I just kind of fell in love with it. And when COVID hit, it got really bad. We were super understaffed. We saw kind of the system that was already really broken, crumbling even more. And I just got really fed up, quit. I started my nonprofit. And that's kind of how I got to here, where I am now.
So are you a native Pittsburghan?
I am.
Is that a word?
Pittsburghan.
Pittsburghan?
We
just made it up.
Now it is.
Pittsburgher, right?
Pittsburgher.
And you grew up in the suburbs, city?
No, so my family's from the north side.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, and then I moved to Shaler, Allison Park area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And out of school, well, what did you take? What was your undergrad?
Social work.
Oh. This is going to be easy and very hard at the same time. Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. What was the desire coming out of high school? Was the work you wanted to do, or you just wasn't sure what you wanted to do?
No, so I wish I could say that I was destined to be a social worker. I knew my whole life. I wish that it was just that I was born to be a social worker, but I actually wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
I was gonna go to CCAC. I was gonna take some. So I was gonna do my undergrad in nursing, and then I wanted to go to medical school, and so I was going to take the prereqs at CCAC.
Sure, okay.
And my first class I walked into was a human resource class. It was a social work class.
Okay.
And I just fell in love with it.
Wow.
And I went and dropped out of nursing classes that day, and I switched my major to social work.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then that was it.
So I always say the following, and it's just my view on life, that at some point in time every human runs into a circumstance where they're thrown out of their comfort zone and they're put in a position to help strangers, not their family or their inner circle, but a stranger. Mm-hmm. And they have that opportunity to make the decision. I think eventually we all are put in a position like that. Mm-hmm. If you take the leap of faith and do it, it's one of the most rewarding things that's ever happened to me. And then you want to do it more. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of on par, do you think, in terms of why people enter that kind of work? Because they have that first taste of how amazing it feels to them to be of help to someone that they don't know.
I was really, really fortunate to grow up around just really strong women in my life who, from a really young age, I have memories of, my mom and my grandmother, and they would bake and take like baked goods to people who, like moms and like single mothers, like in the neighborhood, or they would like support, you know, like families that they knew of, you know, who didn't have enough, or like whatever it was, you know. And we would always like take the angels off the angel tree at the hospital, you know, at the holidays. And I mean, just all of those things we always got involved in. My brother is an EMT, and he's older than me, so I grew up kind of watching him. And my dad is a firefighter. My brother's also a firefighter, and so like I grew up around that. And I think for me, that really heavily influenced me.
The idea of service.
Yeah. And so I think that was a huge like influence on me. But also, I just think a part of me always knew I wanted to be a helper in some way, shape, or form. I always felt things super deeply. I was always very connected to people. I always like wanted to be that way. I always kind of went out of my way, like to,
is that,
you know.
So the nursing spawned from that?
Yeah. I had health issues as a teenager as well. I still do. So I think that I was just really familiar like with the medical field. And then I think it's an honor. Like, and this is after years of working in the field. Like I've been able to kind of like pinpoint this. I think it's an honor to be able to walk with people like through some of the hardest parts of their lives. I get to play such a small role in like their overall like journey. Whatever that journey is. And I think I get a lot of credit. Like there are people who say it takes a special person, you know, whatever the case is, but they actually heal me a lot more in a majority of the cases than I could ever heal them, and more than they'll probably ever know. So I think it's an honor, honestly. And that's really what drives me. I can't like say that that's for everybody, but personally, that's the reason that I stay in it.
Okay, so let's go very elemental for being. Let's just unwind it to its barest form. Foster parenting. Because I'm going to probably guess there are people out there do really, if you put them on the spot, they're really not sure exactly what that entails.
Sure.
So can we unwind it that far back?
Sure. Yeah. I had a person who approached me, because I shouldn't laugh because there's probably other people who think this, but who really thought it was you went and looked at like a catalog. Like they didn't realize you had to become certified to be a foster parent. To be a foster parent.
I think I'll take the redhead.
And I was like, no.
And the tall one over there.
Yeah, I was like, no, like it's training. You go through a lot of training and you know, trauma informed, and like I was throwing a lot of words out there, and I had to like really like sit down and have a conversation with them. But it's so to become like a foster parent, anyone like can become a foster parent, like really like pending like criminal background checks and you know, things like that. And then you go through like things like a home check to make sure, you know, your home is like sound and safe, and you have all the necessary like things like safety locks, you know, whatever,
absolutely.
Whatever the case may be. You get like a family study done. You have to make sure you have like the right home insurance, car insurance, health checks, kind of all of those things. And then you go through like trainings, and then eventually you become like certified, and you can take placements into your home.
So is the idea the program is you are a foster parent to a child for a certain period of time, and then what is that? What determines that time, I guess, is my question. So
the courts do. So you can be like a different like type of foster family to a different type of kid. There's like a respite, which is in like an emergency placement home, so it's temporary. There's like fostering to adopt. So that's like the name is like what it is. So you're fostering them like to become a long-term like adoptive home. And so the courts determine how long like a child like stays in a foster home. On average, they stay in care for 22 months. So okay. So at the end of that 22 months, do they get placed in a different home? Is there a system in place to do that? So like reunification, that's always like the goal.
Well, sure. If possible, right?
If possible. So that's just the average like time that they're in care. What determines what happens after that is kind of what's going on like with their case. So
it's unique.
Yeah. It's what could happen is they could get reunified. And so if that's what we're working towards, and if that's like where the case is moving towards, the parents, that means that they are like going to all of their visits, they're meeting all their goals. So that could mean that they're going to their program, they're working AA, like that could mean what, or that could be what that means. They're finding housing, they have a job, you know, they're financially, they're stable. Or it could mean parents aren't doing any of that and we're moving towards like a termination like of the parental rights, which means we're going to either have to like move towards adoption like from the foster parents, or we have to find them a home that is like willing to adopt. If we can't find them a home that is willing to adopt, that means they might enter a group home. That means they might keep jumping from home to home until we can find them an adoptive home. So the parents' rights are still like able to be terminated, even if we can't like find them an adoptive placement at that time.
Okay, so I'll make no assumptions here. Just for clarification, let's say you have a young child and both parents have drug addiction, and at some point in time, would the judge determine it's been 3, 4, 5 years, you're not making any steps to rehabilitate yourself or correct your life, so this child is not safely going to go back to you? So at that point, does the child go into, would it be group homes? Would it be
also like if they're like in a foster placement that is willing to adopt, then the judge will file like a termination. I'm sorry, the lawyers like will file like a termination. Okay. Like a parental rights, and they will move forward and have that hearing, and the parental, their rights like will be terminated. The adoptive like parents like can then adopt. But if there is like no adoptive like parents like who are stepping up, then they'll go into a group home or go into another home. Like until like we can.
So children that are not under foster care but don't have parents, we call it group homes now. When I was very young, I think it was another name for
orphanage.
Yes, the orphanages don't exist anymore.
It's the same concept.
It's the same concept, just different. It's obviously a nicer word.
Nicer word. Not necessarily a nicer. Like we like to pretend it's nicer. They're not any nicer.
Okay. It's really sad because this whole mechanism, which you are part of understanding and assisting in, is not on the forefront of all of our lives every day. You know, so when people talk about invisible children and things like that, it's like our society does not put a lot of, attention to that, to the average person. I don't see it. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. That's what pisses me off.
Yeah, right on.
Am I allowed to swear?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, this is my show. Damn it, you can do anything you want. Certainly.
Yeah, that's what pisses me off so much. I mentioned I worked in a lot of places, and there's no shortage of really sad things that happen really in this field. Like it doesn't matter where I was working. Any day I walked in and saw something really unfortunate, and it's just kind of a hazard of the job. When I was working, I've also worked with human trafficking, and that's really sad to see and to work around. And I've worked in the jail, and there is no shortage like of tragedy happening there. And I've worked in hospice, and I've worked kind of all over the place. And there's always a way like to compensate it, like in your brain. You have to learn in this field.
You're going to survive. Right?
Yeah, it's the only way you're going to. But when I got to child welfare, there was just no way anymore to compensate it. Like in my brain, there's just no reason these kids were suffering. And it wasn't necessarily like the parents that was causing like me to feel this way. It wasn't necessarily the foster parents or the birth parents. It wasn't my employers. It was like the system. And it was like the society that we were living in, because people weren't outraged by this. I was like just going out every day and just kind of working in this system that was just so broken. And then COVID hit, and I saw just how much it was crumbling even more. And I just got so angry, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm either going to leave the field completely because I'm so burnt out, or I'm going to do something about it. And so I just quit, and with like $10,000, and I started my nonprofit. That was how it came to be, as I was just pissed off and disgruntled, basically. And
so, can we talk about any specific things that were pissing you off, or was it just collectively everything together?
I was seeing so many cases of shaken baby syndrome, and they were pretty bad cases of it. And seeing the way the courts were handling these cases, one specifically, this baby was having like a trauma response, like, to his parents every time we were like in a visit, and the courts were just dragging their feet on doing anything. And then right after that case, I had like another case of shaken baby syndrome, where the baby actually had like a tube place to eat, and they were going to reunify after only like a month or two. And then right after that, this was like a nail in the coffin. I had a mom who I would never be friends with, this woman, outside of, like, if I had met her outside of this, just kind of by chance, I probably would never be friends with her. And she would just go off the rails, like, with these, ridiculous conspiracy theories. And I'm not against conspiracy theories, but she would just go, I want to say one of them, but if she heard it, she'd know I was talking about her, because they were so specific about like Walmart and just ridiculous. But she was doing what she had to do. She was working her programs. We advocated for her so hard in court, and she was really making progress. And the reason her child was taken from her in the first place is because she was involved in like a domestic violence incident. And without her husband in the house, he went to jail. She couldn't take care of her daughter. So that was like the whole reason that she was taken from her in the first place. So she was doing well. She was on her feet. She was working her program. And the courts were still trying to take her daughter and terminate her rights because they didn't agree with her conspiracy theories. And I went to court, was advocating for her, and they shut me down mid testimony because they didn't agree with me. And I was so angry. Went back to my office and I broke a lamp. And I quit like a week later. I couldn't. That was like the nail.
I don't know where to go here. So many places to go. When placing a child for the first time in a foster home, talk about that process a bit. If here's Nancy and Bill, and they want to enter the foster program, what are their first, not obstacles, but their first requirements?
Because as parents, like foster parents?
As foster parents, correct.
Sure. So they would like reach out to like an agency. So here in Pittsburgh, it'd be like Adoption Connection is one that I work with a lot, like through my nonprofit. So they would like reach out to their recruiters or their foster care like department, and they would start with an intake. They just get like a ton of paperwork, like medical release information, just a ton of it, like a ton of information, like via email, like information on like trainings they have to take, like sessions they have to sit in on, just a bunch of stuff. And that's kind of like the first, like kind of steps that they take. And
then if they go through that successfully, then there'll be an examination of the home, obviously, to make sure the home is safe and so forth. And then they'll be able to take placements. Is the concept when you go into a concept to be a foster parent, I guess that's different than going into the concept of looking to adopt, right? Because a foster, it's going to be for a certain period of time, roughly.
So you can still like go in like the fostering like with the intention like to adopt. But you kind of also like go in with the intention of, I know I might not ever like get the chance to adopt. So like you have the desire, like, and the willingness and the openness to, like, I want to adopt, but you know that you might not get to, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
So it's always a gamble. It's an emotional roller coaster, and that's why it's super hard, like, to keep, like, foster parents, because, like, a lot of the foster parents, not all of them, but a lot of the foster parents tried to have their own kids, and they couldn't, and that's kind of, like, what brought them. Not all of them. Like, there were a lot of them who were like, I don't want to keep the kids. Like, I just want to be a safe home, like, temporarily for them.
So, during the years you've done this, what's the most difficult societal ill which is causing strain?
Oh, that's a hard question.
In terms of fostering children or adopting children, what's the number one ill that you see? Is it drugs?
Well, so statistically, they say that the number one like reason is neglect, like is causing like kids like to enter.
Oh, I would not have thought. Do you mean like in terms of just simple?
It's like a super broad. Yeah, it's super broad, this statistic.
Okay. Give me examples of the type of neglect that would fit in that bucket.
Yeah. So if like a kid is like shows up like to school like really like dirty, like obviously not being bathed, and they go and do a home check, and like the home is like really like covered in like feces and things like, you know, really just not like sanitary. That could be an example.
Okay.
If they're not like being like fed, you know, like properly, if they're being left home alone, that's neglect, endangerment. You know, like endangering the welfare of a child. Those types of things. If they have like a medical issue that's not like being like cared for intentionally, that's a form of medical neglect.
Okay.
So that could, you know, like fit in there. There's all sorts of, it's a super like broad.
Okay. So narcotics is a separate bucket?
So they can be charged for multiple things, like that could kind of, so if the neglect was happening because a parent was like on drugs, you know, that could kind of, you know, so like if a parent was out like taking like a drug, and because of that their house was a mess, like, you know, it was really like unsanitary, and the water or the heat like was because in PA we don't have to have running water, like that's not child abuse in PA, but so like
what? Yeah,
that's not like because of all the rural like parts of the state.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like if the gas like was turned off and the house was like not sanitary and there wasn't any food in the fridge, and all of that was because the parents were off like getting high. So there was neglect that was happening in the home because of a drug addiction. So yeah, that could, you know, they kind of play off each other. Yeah.
So outside of the neglect bucket, which we established is very large, what are the other reasons?
Abuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that comes in many different kinds of forms as well too.
Then we also have the really small, and this is a super small percentage of things like truancy, like issues, or if like the child is having like severe like behavioral or addiction issues, and like the parents aren't like managing it, which is also like, even though it's the child who's having the issues, the parents are still kind of neglecting to like take the appropriate.
Truancy. I had that word thrown at me as a scare tactic when I was a child. You better show up at school. The truancy officer will be out to get you. Truancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about narcotics for a second, from what you've seen.
Sure.
Because if you watch the news, Jenna, everything is always bad all the time, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. That's what we're being projected every day. Do you see that playing out in your field? Does it appear to continue to get worse, or is it just bad and it's just continues to be bad?
Yeah, I just think it just continues to be bad. I don't really necessarily, like as you and I talked about, I don't think necessarily things continue to get worse. I think things change. Like, I think things don't necessarily look the same way that they did, even 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 50 years ago. But I think things just change and they look different, but they're just constantly in our face. And I kind of think that is the same, like in my field too, with child abuse. We're just seeing it a lot more. We're hearing about it a lot more. It's not being like brushed under the rug quite as much. We still don't talk about it nearly as much as we should. And it's still, we hear about the child abuse part. We just don't hear about what happens after that, the foster care part of it.
Right.
But I don't think it's necessarily getting worse. I think it's just still bad, Okay. And I think things are certainly perpetuating it, like maybe a little bit. But I don't necessarily think the problem overall like is getting worse, if that makes sense.
The pandemic, I know we don't like talking about it anymore. Hopefully we're past it until the next one. Who knows? I don't know. But talk about some of the challenges that brought to your industry.
Sure. Well, so my like day-to-day life didn't change a ton. Like we were still like doing the home visits, and we were still kind of we were doing all the things still. But the court was on Zoom.
Yeah, how's that work?
That was not.
Or does it work?
No, it did not work. We saw like a decline of parents who were able to access court, like the birth parents who didn't have access to like electronics, phones, computers, or whatever the case was. They weren't able to attend court. So we saw a lot of issues with that. We saw kids who weren't able to see like their parents as often because they weren't able to have visits, which meant they also weren't able to have visitation with their siblings, because a lot of kids aren't placed in the same foster homes as their birth siblings.
Does that happen a lot?
Majority, I think like 80% of the time.
Wow. That's horrible.
So like they were going through this like shock of not only did they not have their birth parents, which whether they're abused or not, that's still their birth parents, and that's still a trauma.
Sure.
So they had that trauma on top of all of this stuff that's happening because of a pandemic, on top of the fact they're not with their siblings anymore. Right. In this weird home with people they don't know, no matter how pleasant they are. They don't know them. They're not in school. They have no peers. They have no, so, it was just like trauma after trauma after trauma. I mean, these kids were like, it was compounding. So that was probably like trying to, explain to these kids what was happening,
Well, it's interesting that all of us were trying to create normalcy for our children some way in a normal environment. But here you're talking about children that probably don't even know what normalcy is, because there's probably so much change in the way they live their life.
Yeah, these kids, a lot of times, trauma is so weird, like, and funny, and we never know how it's going to affect a kid, and already without like all these other things like COVID happening, because it really disrupts like their childhood, like their development, like what's supposed to be happening just halts, and like so this traumatic thing happens to them. And so now, like, they're getting too much, like, too soon, just all at once. And so they're trying to, like, compensate for that. And then you throw COVID in there, which is, like, this extended period of, like, trauma, essentially, like, for them, because like, they're being pulled out of school. It's just more change happening, more uncontrolled, like, circumstance that they just see no end in sight for. So it was just, it was, like, this very twisty road of trying to navigate with them.
The schools being closed or going virtual created challenges for those students that are probably not going to be understood for a while. And for all students. It was
hard too for kids that weren't even in foster care, because teachers couldn't get eyes on kids. So a lot of cases of child abuse went like underreported, and a lot of people thought that CYF was closed, so they weren't reporting child abuse. Like, there was a whole thing where the emails were sent out, like commercials, like were put out on the air, reminding like people, like we're here, we're still open, like we're answering the phones. You can, Like agencies are open. We're all open. We're still investigating, actively investigating. Like,
So how does the overlap work with what you do and in conjunction with the government employees and child welfare? Like, how does that maneuver in some way? I'm just always confused about the delineation of the lines of responsibility or how that works together.
Yeah, so
that's probably a big question, but some kind of like working understanding of that.
No, it's okay. So like CYF are the counties. They're like the umbrella, and they oversee like the smaller agencies. Okay. So like my nonprofit, I guess, like I don't have a contract like with the counties, but if I did, I would be under that umbrella.
Okay.
I act like kind of like independently. I work with counties, but not really contracted like through them. So I'm kind of like off to the side. I'm like the rock kind of off over to the side. But any of the agencies like that are contracted like through them, like so all the foster care agencies, like who actually like place like the children. So like Adoption Connection, the Children's Institute. They used to have a foster care agency when I worked there. It closed during COVID.
Okay.
They were under that umbrella. Like Adoption Connection. Cannot think of any of the other agencies, but so they are all like contracted like through them. When like CYF like goes out like and pulls a child like out of a home, they go like back to the agencies and sees like who has a family, like who's available like to take a placement, and so then they take it like to that agency, and that agency like goes like to that family.
Okay.
So that's kind of
okay. A lot of times the public has an opinion of government agencies, all government jobs work as everything being slow and inefficient.
It is. And
terrible. Is that also your impression?
CYF, yeah, and they're very unresponsive.
Okay.
In my experience, and I shouldn't like say that that's because of the workers. It's because they have ridiculous amounts of caseload. I mean, unreasonably high amount of caseload. Way above like what they should have. They're overseeing way too much. And there just isn't enough like funding. It's just
is that the crux of the problem?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it kind of like trickles like down into the agencies too, because they don't have like any of the staff, or because their funding is also like just not there. Like they're not like getting any of the funding from the county because the county doesn't really have the fund. It's
we're just putting our money other places.
Yeah, like when they've had to close like foster care agencies because they're not like profiting like anything for organizations. And you think about it, like should they be profiting really? And foster care children, children in foster care should not be profiting money for any. That's they're not.
So you're saying that the powers that be are looking to somehow, in some weird way, seeing the entity being profitable.
Yeah, that's kind of what it all comes down to.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's kind
of, can't really be self-supporting, right? I mean, nothing's being created there. There's no product being created there. Are the children products?
Yeah, that's exactly. So it's kind of, I understand things need to pay for themselves. I'm not naive to that, but they're children in foster care through no fault of their own.
Okay, so talk to me about some of the things that you would like to see happen that could make differences either right away or in the not too near future. If you were in charge, if you were sitting at the top as of tomorrow, Jenna's going to take care of it.
It's a scary thought, giving me that much power.
I'm giving it to you in terms of this discussion.
I would like to see a lot more education happening about like trauma informed. I think that would be one of like the first things that I would like to do. These early intervention. That's one of the things I'm working on, like in my nonprofit. I think that would change a lot of outcomes for kids.
Okay, so help me understand. When you say education, you mean the public's education?
Yeah, like public and providers. So like foster kids. Like one of the biggest issues that we have like in foster care is that we don't have like enough foster families.
Okay.
And like a part of the reason is we don't have like the a support with providers, like to help, like kind of like meet, like foster kids have a lot of very unique, like needs.
Okay. When you say providers, what do you mean?
Like mental health.
That's what I thought. Okay.
It could be like pediatricians.
Okay. So the network's failing you.
There's a lot of different, and like a lot of it is they just don't have the education or the resources. And so I think that would be like one of the first thing, like more education on like trauma, more education on like early intervention. And that's like one of the things that my nonprofit is working on is more like trauma informed and more early intervention.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the like the biggest things that would have to change. And then I think also like just having more like specialized individuals like in places like of power who are like making these choices of what happens to these children. And I don't know exactly how that would happen. Like I think that the courts are important, and I think that they play like a vital like role, obviously, and they're necessary. But I think kind of putting more like guardrails in place to kind of make sure that like abuses of power aren't happening, and like corrupt like systems aren't in place, and like these children aren't like falling like through the cracks because like a judge doesn't like that a parent has these conspiracy theories, you know, like, because if that were the case, half the country would have lost their children, you know. It's
probably,
you know, that's not child abuse.
Yeah, that's that human element of this court system where there, you know, as much as you like to believe there's no bias, and ultimately in the outcome, there's humans involved. There's always going to be bias.
Yeah. So I think just putting like the guardrails in place to kind of like, whether that is like making it a panel or trying to like putting more things in place. I don't know what that would look like. I think that would take, you know, conversations and, you know, but I think putting people in places who have education or who have worked in this field, you know, kind of, I don't know, like it would take a lot of conversation. I don't have the answer. I wish I had all the answers, but you know, just something in place to kind of make sure that not so many kids were falling.
Kids falling through the cracks?
Like of the court systems, yeah.
Is that when people say that, that's a true statement? Children are falling through the cracks of the system. They
just go unseen. I mean, like things just kind of happen, and it's like a really bad like series of events, and because of that, they just kind of, I mean, they really do fall through the cracks.
You know, so there's a part of society that wants more and more narcotics to be legalized for whatever the reasons are, monetary, you know, less incarceration, all that. What's your thoughts? I mean, is based upon what you see because you're seeing it from a different angle. You're seeing the results of children, maybe hopefully not using more narcotics themselves, but, you know, seeing their parents possibly on more narcotics. Do you have any opinion on that at all?
Yeah.
Is it even relevant?
You know, yeah, I mean, kids, like teens especially, like I see a lot of teens like experiment, and it's not even necessarily, I mean, yes, if their parents have like an addiction, they're definitely at a higher risk, I mean, of having an addiction themselves. And especially if it's like a trauma thing, they're at a higher risk like of self-medicating, especially if they have easy access to a narcotic. And if it's legalized, then there's not much of a...
Well, I think about marijuana, you know, that it's not a drug that initially comes to mind when you think about violence or anything. In fact, you think people get more mellow when they take it, right? But you like marijuana, it's another way of numbing yourself. And humans are for centuries have been trying to numb ourselves, right? And sometimes bad things happen when we are numb. Yeah. And I can't imagine more of that could possibly be a good thing.
Yeah. You know, I think, and this is with anything with alcohol, with sex, people do the same thing with sex. I think putting the emphasis more on that, like you and Rocco talked about yesterday, emotional intelligence, kind of having that. I think it's super hard to prevent every form. if people are going to self medicate, if they're going to avoid it that hard, they're going to. Like I've really learned that you cannot avoid. If people just don't want to deal with it, they're just not going to. It's kind of what I have learned.
I mean, in terms of just life in general,
yeah,
if they're going to drop out.
Their pain, their trauma, whatever it is, if they don't want to, they're not going to. And that's kind of what I have learned. And it has not been an easy realization to come to, because I have wanted to save everybody in my career. I mean, letting people go, especially letting people be self-destructive, is not in my nature. Especially when I love them and care for them, whether it's a client or someone I'm friends with or in my family. But if people are just don't want to deal with it and that's what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. And so I don't, necessarily know if I think keeping it illegal is going to do anything. I don't know if I necessarily have a super strong opinion one way or another.
Because the draw to the substance is so strong that whether it's illegal or not, they're going to use it. And
I kind of think too, of all the trees I'm going to bark up, I don't know if marijuana is the one that I really want to. And I don't know if that's the one that I really want to keep kids away from their parents for too, because it's as long as it is illegal, that is what we're going to keep taking kids away from. So it's on the spectrum of things. I'm kind of I don't really want to know that you're doing that, because I'm still your social worker.
Right.
Don't tell me that. Don't come smelling like it. Don't tell me about it. Don't talk about it. Right. I don't want to see that joint. Don't show me that vape pen. Because I still have to report it. So that's what I used to say.
Well, alcohol smell, right?
Yep. Same thing with that. Yeah. It's the same thing with that. It's do not come smelling like it. I don't want to bark up your tree about it. So don't make me bark up your tree about it. It's kind of the approach that I kind of had with it. And that's kind of just, of all the things, it's just kind of not the tree that I want to bark up, I think. I think that's just kind of, I don't think I really have a strong opinion on it.
Does the neglect portion of this, because the parent is strung out, is it a huge percentage increase that these kids are going to have their own addiction problems because of what they've seen? Are there numbers to support that, as far as you know?
You'd be amazed at the amount. I mean, there are a lot of kids who, because of their trauma, and that's kind of the dysfunction is really all that they know, depending on how long they were exposed to it. So dysfunction just knows dysfunction. It's kind of like it breeds dysfunction. Okay. But you'd be amazed also by the amount of kids who are just so resilient as well. And they never touch it. That's there. I've met some, again, they heal me more than I'll ever help them. They are just the most incredible kids who just grow up to, we sent this little girl who was abused, severely abused. And she's in a fantastic foster home now. We sent her to a space camp. My nonprofit, we spent $5,000 and we were able to spend at the wire. We got her to this camp, miraculously pulled the money together, and we got her there for the summer. And she is so much smarter than I will ever be. I mean, I will never play a game for money against this kid, because she will bankrupt me. She will bankrupt me. She is so smart. She is so smart. I will never debate against her. She is so smart. She is not like a girl of many words, but she is going to run the world one day. And
that's awesome.
And she's so resilient, and she's just incredible. And if any kid had every right to fall apart, it would be her. And she never did. And she's stronger than I will ever be. And I take that to my grave. I mean, she is incredible. And there are so many kids just like her. And so yeah, of course, there's always those kids who
Sure.
Dysfunction breeds dysfunction. And again, a lot of those kids are products of the system. They fall through the cracks. A lot of things are just set up. They are set up to just fail, unfortunately. And it goes back to, you can't save them all. And it breaks my heart. And probably is going to be the death of me one day trying to. But there are so many kids too who just are just incredible. It's just so resilient. So yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah, the spirit of children is just, adults could learn from. We've forgotten what it was like to be a kid where anything is possible.
Yeah.
We lose a little bit as we get older. Sometimes. Some of us, not all of us. Some of us do. Some of us don't. Yeah, I just think that like someone like myself who's just out there living their life, the tragedy of a lot of these children are not on the forefront of what we see every day.
Yeah.
I mean, you might get a taste of it if you're inclined to watch those shows, Law and Order and things like that. If you like that kind of stuff, you somewhat get a view, but it's all television.
It is. And it's, I don't necessarily recommend that you watch those like to get, not that they're all super unrealistic, because some of them are kind of realistic, but I wouldn't. There are like a docuseries on Netflix like that you can watch. There's one, it's like the trials of Gabriel Hernandez, I think was his last name.
Okay.
It came out right at the beginning of COVID. And I recommend that. I might not have given you the right title. I'll have to send it to you on Facebook. But it's like a really, really good one.
So it's accurate to actually really what's happening.
Yeah, and it happened out like in California. Like it's an actual portrayal of an actual event that happened.
Wow.
And that's a good one. So I mean, it'll break your heart, but it's a good like factual one to watch.
We assume that big cities are rougher and grittier and things are always worse in the big city. But I would imagine neglect happens in every pocket of the country, right? Yeah. It
gets really like seedier, like in gray out like in the rural parts because
less eyeballs on it.
That and it just doesn't look the same. And like I used to have cases out in like I don't want to say the Amish country, but like the more rural parts of PA, and I would go out there and it just looked very different than it does here. And you have to kind of check yourself because it's like, wait, am I being biased because this is just not my way of living? Or like, is this child like, I used to really have to kind of have that like internal like debate with myself a little bit. Like, okay, this is kind of a shack, but like it's also kind of how they live,
It's I can imagine the judgment calls that you would need to do in that job have to be pretty stressful.
Yeah. I didn't love it. I was like, I just get the hell out of here. I was like, I'm not like a rural social worker. I give them a lot of credit. I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think it would be different.
I don't think it's any worse like in the cities though, honestly. I just think we see it more. Again, we see it more. We're just seeing it more. It's and we're closer together. It's not as easy to hide in the city, Right. They do a lot more homeschooling too, like in the rural parts of the there's a lot of reasons that it can go, kind of under the radar, like in the rural parts of the state, like than it would in the city. There's a lot of reasons.
Do some kids just miss a big bunch of their K through 12 schooling because they get I don't know, they fall through the cracks, they get locked into the system? I mean, that's got to affect the quality of their K through 12 experience, I would think, right?
Mm-hmm. And even if they are in school, if they're experiencing like abuse, that's affecting their ability to learn, to take in any new information. So even if they are in school and they're present every day, how much are they really taking in for some kids? So, it's...
So children go into a group home, they're waiting to be placed in a foster home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about what does a group home mean? Like, how's that run? How many kids are there? Like, is it a state paid for and run organization, or what's a group home?
So it's like a county, like usually a county like paid for and run. Like it's through like like nonprofit like or organization, like most of the time that's contracted like through like the county. So here in Pittsburgh, Family Links like has a shelter, like a group home. And like the size, it just depends on their staff, like to child like ratio, and depends on a lot of different things. It depends on the age group. It also depends on if they have like medical like issues, if they're behavioral, all kinds of things. And it looks like almost kind of like a hospital. I hate to say that, but that's like, or like a dorm, I guess is like a nicer way of putting it. Not as nice as a dorm in my opinion. Unfortunately, they can't like force them, like especially as teens, like to stay there. They're able to come and go as they want. When I like used to work in a shelter for teens, like we used to have to like call the police and report them like missing all the time.
What's the age that they're able to, like you said, you can't require them to stay there as a teen, like up to what age? 13, 15, 12?
We had like, I think an 11-year-old who was like walking out. I mean, like this kid was behavioral. Like, and we used to have to call the police all the time. And
that was permitted? Like he was permitted to go?
He'd just walk out. I mean, like we couldn't restrain him and like force him to stay there.
Wow.
But he wasn't like one of mine, so I could be wrong on that. Like, because he was on like the lower floor. I worked upstairs, like with the women. So I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that they had that issue with him. And yeah, I mean, they kind of came and went. We had a lot of behavioral issues. So something that we run into a lot of times, like with youth at that age, like especially especially like late teens, because in PA they don't age out until 21. And so what we see...
What does that mean, age out?
So they they're like aging out of the foster care like system. They are no longer like property of the state, so they are no longer like foster children.
That doesn't happen at 18, and you're saying it happens at 21.
Here in PA, so it's state to state, so it changes. So like in Florida, it's 18. They age out at 18 in Florida.
So, okay, hypothetically, there is an 18-year-old that's in foster care. Doing great. He was going to go work as a mechanic and wants to get his own apartment. He's not allowed to do that?
He can do that.
Oh,
yeah, he can still do that. So once they turn 18, they can technically sign themselves out. They can become emancipated.
Okay.
We don't typically recommend that because they can get like assistance and
Understood.
You know, like health insurance and
Benefits,
kind of all those
right.
things to help them like get on their feet, like get through school, kind of get a job, all those
Okay.
things. Whereas a lot of times, like when they sign themselves out, a majority of them become homeless on the same day, which is when they end up on drugs, end up in jail, end up being trafficked, kind of all of those things. But so the group homes, what we're seeing is kids who are like, especially older teens, they've been in the system for like such a long time that they don't want to be told like what to do, where they can and can't go. They're so mad, rightfully so. They have some behavioral issues. They're so traumatized. They've been like bounced around so much.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of don't want to hear anything. And so that's kind of the biggest issue that, you know, we have at that point is just kind of...
Isn't it interesting? We do not have... I know people hate when I say this, but I do say this. We don't have a law that requires permission to procreate. So you've got, that's the one thing that anybody can do on a whim. They can just have kids.
Yeah. There is actually a social worker in Texas.
It's so sad. It's so sad.
There is a social worker in Texas, and I wish I had more details on this, but I heard this story from a professor. She came from like a lot of money in her family, and she went to hospitals and used to pay women who were like addicted, like to get their tubes tied. And that's what she did, like so they couldn't get pregnant. And then she was apparently like run out of the profession. This was like in the 1900s, like early 1900s, apparently.
It's not a crazy concept when you see the human cost of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't even ponder it, it sounds harsh in one regard, and the other, it sounds absolutely logical on the other side.
Yeah, you know, I have like the social work part of me that, you know, is all about, you know, I'm a very firm like believer in people can change, and people I don't
I am too.
Like when people come to me, I don't think anyone's past the point of redemption.
Yeah.
I'm willing to work with anybody, even if you screw up 100 times, you know, as long as you like are willing to keep trying, I'm willing to keep helping you. And it's a team sport. So as long as you're here and you're, you know, actively participating, like I can't be trying harder, but as long as you're here actively trying, then I will keep helping you. But at the same time, on the more personal side of it, I had 3 miscarriages myself. And I do have a son, and he's my miracle baby that I never should have been able to have. Mm-hmm. I had like cervical cancer, and I'm getting a hysterectomy here soon. And it's, you know, all I ever wanted was to be a mom. And, you know, I will never get to be a mom again. I'm so lucky to have the one child I have, but, you know, surrounding myself in the career that I have, it is on that personal part of me does eat at me sometimes, that, you know, that there are people who just so effortlessly reproduce. And
I'll say it haphazardly.
Yeah.
And the devastation that decision makes, the human devastation, is terrible.
Yeah. And I'm the one who is trying to help these children, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that is a harder thing at times that I've struggled with, like, in this career, especially after I had my son.
Oh,
it
sure.
got harder after I had my son.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, in my eyes, just aren't open enough because I have not been involved in the medical field at all. I mean, I just never, the medical field, the health and human services, it's just, and if you're not really exposed to it through another family member or someone, you know, a lot of the population just does not have a good working knowledge of it. And that's probably the problem why they're not funded like they should be.
Yeah, I think I had a person like explain this to me, and it makes sense. And he had told me, so he comes from like a lot of money, and he goes, Jenna, sweetheart, that's what he always refers to me as. You know, we, people like him, work really hard so we can like build our lives in a certain way. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what, this really makes sense. And he kind of went on to say that like he like goes to charity events and he networks and he like does the things that he does so that he kind of like can give back and kind of like feel good like for giving to charities and do his part. But then once that's over, that's over. So it's like he doesn't have to look at kind of the uglier parts.
That is most of us.
And it's like, you know, the more I kind of thought about it, I was like, you know, there are really sad things in our society that we kind of have to look at because we have to be exposed to them every day. Like cancer is an example. And like cancer is really, really sad. You know, it's very tragic. But you get closure kind of with cancer. It's either like they unfortunately pass away and it's really sad, or they go into remission, but it's closure one way or another. Or it's like, unfortunately, like chronic, but you don't hear about that either because there's no closure.
Good point. Very good point.
But you get closure with the other two. Foster care, you don't get closure. You know, it's this chronic ongoing thing. It's traumatic and it's ugly, and the kids aren't ugly. The kids are beautiful and resilient.
Do you get closure on the rare occasions when you get a foster family that adopts the child?
I don't think so. I think they're dealing with trauma and things the rest of their lives. You know, there are kids like in foster care who I know who like got adopted at a pretty young age and had a really good life, and later on, like in adulthood, they commit suicide. You know, because the things that they deal with, just that trauma in early childhood with just not the right support professionally. You know, like necessarily, it's just devastating. So it's like, really, I don't think it is real closure. Even if you have a happy ending, you still are forced to deal with those things for the rest of your life, you know?
So thoughts on mental health for a second. So what the hell are we doing to each other on social media? That can't be helping our mental health. That's right. I mean, and then you're on Instagram and you're scrolling through and this coffee's the best for you. And this program is going to make you feel great. And this one's going to help you lose weight. And this one's going to help you give you mental peace. And it's like we're constantly being sold our mental health. Yeah. Almost, right?
Way too much information all the time. And not to mention, algorithms are not a good thing.
Great statement.
Algorithms.
That's a great statement.
Algorithms are not, and you know, don't get me wrong, I have become accustomed to some things with technology as well. You know, I've used AI like that chat.
You're not a Luddite. Yep,
yeah, you know, there are some things that I've really become accustomed to as well, for sure. But we don't need all of that. And I know someone's going to come at me for that. But like, you know, it's
I'm there with
It's
you.
way too much. And it's not good for adults. It's not good for youth. It's not good for anybody. And you know how many teens I need to talk out of in a week having a conniption over the things that they see on social media, whether it's like models. And I'm like, honey, the things that you see on it's not real. Social media is not real. You know, and the people who come at you on social media are not real. They're real, but like it.
Yeah, it's. I think without a strong parental backbone in that family, the children can absolutely be negatively manipulated by social media. The parents really got to be there to not only manage it, but to be able to manage the time, but also be able to unwind all the damage that's constantly being done.
Mm-hmm. And even with that, kids are really smart. There are now apps that you can download on phones that hide,
of course,
other apps, which I didn't know. Thank God.
Better stay up on that.
I'm screwed. My son's already smarter than me. He goes, Mom, there are tornadoes on Jupiter. I was like, what? I was like, what? And there are tornadoes on Jupiter. He saw that in one of the science. I bought it for him. I guess I get credit for that.
Your fault.
I bought it for him. But yeah, no, there are things in technology that you can hide. And teenagers.
Oh yeah.
But these foster parents are coming to me and like she's having, and there are like 12-year-olds with eating disorders because they're hiding the amount of time they're spending on, like their parents have no idea how much time they're spending on social media. And the algorithms, like they looked at one thing one time and so they're being bombarded now with,
and
like,
why is that not predatory? Like, I don't have any problem using that word. I know now the other side of the equation is, well, that's just great marketing and great sales science and all that stuff's part of like building a better mousetrap. From a monetary standpoint, absolutely.
But at what cost? So
But if you're trying to predict the emotions and the behavior of a child, right, with an algorithm, that's pretty predatory to me.
Yeah, and it's not like this might happen if we're doing this. It's pretty established that this is the outcome. Like it's not like 5 years ago where we didn't know that this was going to be the outcome for young people. Like we know this is established now through research and through years and years and years of case study.
And it's funny because a part of me says, well, it's a parent's responsibility to understand the threat, mitigate it, and so the child can understand and maneuver. I get all of that, man. I am on board. But we're living in a time where it's just, like you mentioned, it's so fast and the algorithms are so, for lack of a better phrase, I'll use the word vicious. They're vicious in the way they operate and they manipulate. I mean, really manipulate. It's almost, with a child, you can almost say, I can't believe I'm saying this, but this is actually what I feel. Yeah. You can almost say there's almost an involuntary reaction of that child to that algorithm. Yeah. Because they're not smart enough at that age to be able to defend themselves from being manipulated.
They don't have the impulse control, and they don't have like the critical thinking skills.
Most adults don't have it. How do we expect a child to have it?
Yeah, and then once they're like sucked into it, they don't have like the ability to think past right now. So it's like, how do I think past this, what I'm feeling right now? So I feel really bad right now. How can I think past this really low feeling that I'm feeling right this second? I can't. Well, I have to stop eating. I have to, God forbid, I have to try to kill myself or hurt myself, and that's kind of what we're seeing in the field. And it's kind of, and it's the argument of, well, don't like give your kid a phone. That's not really even an argument anymore because you really can't at this day and age. Like at that point, we're just trying to delay the inevitable. We can't. Technology is rapidly, especially when COVID hit, like we just like hit the accelerator, We
absolutely did. I can remember 96 when I started the guitar business. on the internet, and the internet was fascinating to me. I could go and type any question I have in this box, hit it, and then turn around and watch an episode of MASH, and later on, things will start popping up because it was so slow. But it was fascinating that I knew we're really in trouble in regards to kids, because you're not going to be able to keep pornography, bad stuff away from the child who figures out how to log on to AOL. In my head, I knew. I just knew it was just so. Like, the pornography thing was upsetting to me because I had my first son in year 2000. It was like, there's no way that's just not going to be mainstreamed into society, and that's exactly what it is now. Pornography is on demand, where generations prior, that was not for minors, and you may still believe it's not for minors, which I believe, but it's right there. It's
broadcasted to minors.
It's right there. So, from the very get-go, I just saw that that our landscape was really going to be changed, and really not in that regard, not in a great way. And we're just like all that on steroids now. It's all. My point was, you had to go with intent, right? You went to the web with intent to inquire about something. Yeah. Now they just turn on Instagram and start scrolling, and they're just being.
It pops up in your face. Yeah.
And I read somewhere that it was either Instagram or Facebook. I think it was, they're owned, right? But when Instagram was separate from Facebook, I think there were firms that were working on the slot machines for the big gambling houses that were doing the video slots, and that whole mechanism to keep the eye that was brought in, and that's where the scrolling came from. Were those technology folks?
Okay.
It's terrible.
I try not to think too much about it because I don't understand it that much. I don't want to understand it that much. It honestly scares me a little bit when I think too much about it.
Does the AI scare you?
A little bit. I just think all of it, because I think it's so much more sophisticated than I could ever even imagine, and I feel the same way. And I'm just kind of like.
I feel the same way. Yeah, there was a simplicity. I have a very clear memory of the before times, before 95, I say, before the web, and life was slower. We did things with more intention.
We were being outside a lot more.
We were being outside. We weren't looking. We used to get yelled at for watching television too long. That was a thing. Like, don't. You're going to make your eyes go bad. You don't stare at television for more than 3 or 4 hours at a time.
I don't know if that's a thing. My eyes really are bad. I don't know. Maybe that is a thing.
I don't know. It's like, we've come we're so different.
So different.
We're so different.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, the way, because I try to really still, like, my son and I get into it. He has an iPad. He had health problems when he was a year old. I was happy I did it. Man, we spent a lot of time in the hospital. But him and I argue now. We'll straight up fight, this kid and I, with the iPad. Because I'm like, nope, like, 1 hour, that's it. And so I try to be super conservative with him, and I have that same conversation with parents that I work with. And working with teenagers now, who that's all their whole life. That's like, technology has been a very active role in their lives. And I'm just like, you couldn't pay me to be a teenager in this day and age with technology, and I feel like I'm constantly putting fires out for teenagers, just trying to talk them, just other like mean girls online and people hiding behind the screen, talking shit to each other, and, all the bullying that happens online. And, I am not the type of like social worker that like sugarcoats, I swear, in front of like my teen clients. Not a ton, but I will a little bit. And just the fires, the things that I have to say to these girls, I bet. I can't even. I'm like, you couldn't pay me to be a teenager in this day and age with this. I couldn't even imagine. I could not even imagine.
Yeah, we're living in strange times. Like we're now in this world where we have two realities. This physical reality, we're talking to each other, looking each other in the eye, this physical reality, and then we have this virtual reality, which, you know, was minimum. I mean, the impact of it was, we thought, manageable 20 years ago. Oh, it's just another, I'm going to go to the web and search for something. We were going there with intent.
Mm-hmm.
And then social media, I think, 2007, 8, 9, ushered in this new thing where we almost became dependent upon that other reality. We weren't really dependent upon it before. It was a tool. It's not a tool anymore. It could be if we chose to use it that way. We just succumb to it now.
I find it super interesting to see the way that it interferes with relationships and breakups, especially like in younger individuals. I've really found that super interesting to talk to the clients and the girls that I work with, and some of the guys that I work with.
Okay. And
just the way that it impacts that, like the breakup and the getting back together and like the social media stalking. I had a teenager who she was like 17, 18, still a teenager. And she like had broken up with this guy, and this all played out all over social media. I mean, like, I was on her page looking at it, and I was like, stop posting to social media. And this girl that apparently her ex was also hooking up with while they were in a relationship also was chiming in and messaging her. And this was just all playing out on social media. And she ended up getting back together with her ex via social media. And this girl was still messaging her also via social media. And I'm just like, oh my God. Oh my God. This is like we could cancel soap operas and just start like live streaming these types of things on. I mean, there are people on like TikTok who will like read just all these things like playing out on social media, and they make a ton of money just kind of broadcasting things that are aired on social media. But just all of this about her breakup just aired all over. And I'm like, do you realize that one day when you go and interview for a job and they search you on social media, your breakup in 2021 is just going to be front and center?
We're not, especially youth, they're not sophisticated at this point. Now, maybe they will down the line, but from a judgment standpoint, they're not sophisticated enough to understand the implications of their actions for a lot of what they do there. Hell, I think a lot of adults don't understand it enough. But at least, you know, you should at that age, right? But as a minor, like, it's devastating. One stupid decision can affect your entire life, and you can make that decision when you're 12. You know?
I had to have a whole conversation with a 13-year-old I was working with who was sending nudes to somebody she didn't know over social media. And I'm like, I work with people who are trafficked. Like, you can be trafficked via the internet, via social media. Like, it's a real, like, you are very vulnerable just because of your age. And I was like, I'm not saying you're not smart. I'm saying you're naive because of your age.
Right. And
that was a whole conversation I also had to have. And she just did not believe me. Like, it was just blew her mind that could be. And it's
I don't know how you do it, my friend. Thank God there's people like you to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Did you have a good time? I
did. Thank you so much.
Definitely would love to have you back.
I'd love to come back.
Yeah, in multiple formats, too. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really appreciate this, Jenna.
Thank
you did
you.
Great. I mean, I don't know if you were nervous. You seemed like you were nervous in the beginning. I'm like, this is going to be easy. You did great.
Thank you.
You did great. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
All right, how can they reach you?
I'll give you myself a number.
Well, 412, in terms of like the audience, is it 412project.org?
Yeah. So
412 Foster Project.
Yeah, fosterproject.org. Yeah.
Okay, and that's the easiest way to reach you.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right. We're out.